Hello, my beautiful supply chain and logistics people. I'm Professor Rodriguez, and I'm back with more lessons on supply chain and logistics. And in today's video, we're going to be going into lesson number 5. I know it's already lesson number 5, and this is part of our Learning Logistics series. If you're interested in getting to know even more about supply chain and logistics, you can always check out my Introduction to Supply Chain course, which is filled with lots of on-demand lessons, plus 8 live Zoom sessions with me as your instructor, where I teach you about these topics in more detail. Plus, I help you craft your resume and figure out what your next steps are to become your full-fledged logistics and supply chain professional and where to take your career next. So if you're interested, I'm going to put some links in the description below, or just click some of the links on the page on the channel. There's links everywhere for you to find that out, okay? So if you're interested, check that out. All right, let's get to the good stuff, and let's start with lesson number 5. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about what are supply chain macro processes. If you have been watching our Learning Logistics series, then you know that these lessons are structured in a progressive way, meaning they're coming in a particular order so that everything that you're learning sort of makes sense, and you're picking up on the things you learned previously and you're taking them into future lessons. So that's what we're doing here today. We already talked about what are supply chain processes in the previous lesson. So check that out. I'm going to link them in the card somewhere here so you could check out that playlist and catch up on lessons 1, 2, 3, and 4. But here in today's lesson number 5, we're going to talk about what are supply chain macro processes, which is what comes next. The supply chain processes we have discussed in the previous lesson were the cycle processes and the push and pull processes. And these can be classified into 3 macro processes. So if you look at a perspective from a macro perspective, you're looking at things as a bigger picture. So that's what we're trying to focus on now. We're looking at sort of the processes that we already did or learned about. And now we're going to look them into a way that it's making sense from more of a strategic perspective for the entire company and the entire supply chain. So that's what we're going to learn about here in this lesson. So in total, there will be 3 macro processes we're going to talk about. And these macro processes manage the flow of material, information, and finances. Sound familiar? Well, we learned about them when we talked about supply chain flows back in a couple of lessons. See how it all comes around? There's a reason why we do this, right? There's a reason why we make it in this way, so that you learn about supply chain flows, you learn about what that is, so that we can take them into the next concepts as we move forward. So yes, so these macro processes we're going to talk about in this lesson, they will be able to manage, or the whole purpose of them is to manage the flow of the material, the finances, the information in our supply chain flows. Now, these are required to generate and receive and fulfill a customer request. Once again, I know it might sound repetitive, but it is because it's such an important reason or important concept to know what flows in our supply chain, how we learn to manage these, and that everything really revolves around the customer and the demand that the customer has for a particular good. Think about it. If there's no customer, there's no need, there's no demand, then there's no business, there's no company, there's no product that we want to push out or pull from our customers. All right, so make sure that you keep that in mind, because it is very, very important. The reason of learning and having these concepts, or the macro processes, is because they provide a holistic view and should always be directed by and aligned by the company's mission. After all, they really represent the functions and everything that the organization performs to achieve its core business. Meaning, we provide sort of this view, as I mentioned to you before, this sort of very wide-eyed view of everything that goes on, so that we can align it to what our company stands for, what our company hopes to achieve, what our company is looking to do out there in the market or in the world in general. So that's the reason that we look at these sort of processes in a way that takes us into a larger perspective, so that we can see everything, every single function, everything that goes on in our supply chains, so that we can make sure that they align with where our company is going or what the goals or the plans are for the future of our company. This is why, in order to identify the macro processes in our supply chain, it is really necessary to fully understand the company's environment. That means we need to know what happens within our company and also externally or outside of our company. The whole environment that our supply chains are going to function in really are going to factor into how our supply chains perform. Being able to understand the environment around our company and internally as well is going to allow us to create and structure our supply chains in a way, and these processes in a way that it makes our supply chains flow a lot smoother and more efficiently. So how do we do this? We do this by trying to answer some questions, such as what demand does my company need? What do we do and what steps do we follow? Is it necessary to involve more than one department or area in trying to do a particular activity? Is the work going to be standardized and the quality will always be the same or deliver the same every single time? And what are the impacts that each activity will bring to the final result? When we start to find answers to these questions, that is when our company can really start to understand how interconnected we are and also the level of complexity in our processes. So it's a way to be able to identify the processes, be able to analyze them, and then finally be able to perfect them or refine them. So that's the whole reason as to why we ask these questions and why we try to find solutions and the answers to these questions within our supply chain. Now we're into the next section, and here we're going to take a look at the types of macro processes. And as I mentioned earlier, there's 3 types of macro processes. These are supplier relationship management, or SRM, internal supply chain management, or ISCM, and customer relationship management, or CRM. So you know the deal. We're going to talk about them in detail, each of them in detail. The first one that we're going to look at is supplier relationship management, or SRM. SRM are all the processes that focus on the interface between the firm or the company and its suppliers. The SRM macro processes aim to arrange for and to manage supply sources from various different goods and services that the company needs. The SRM processes include the evaluation and selection of suppliers, negotiation of supply terms, and communication regarding new products and orders with suppliers. Up next, we have Internal Supply Chain Management, or ISCM. All of these processes are all the internal processes within the firm. So the ISCM macro processes, they really target or they aim to fulfill demand generated by the CRM process in a timely manner and at the lowest possible cost. ISCM processes include the planning of internal production and storage capacity, preparation of demand and supply plans, and fulfillment of the actual orders. Now we have customer relationship management, or CRM. These CRM processes are all the processes that focus on the interface between the firm and its customers. So these are at the other side of the spectrum, between the company and their customers. Now the CRM macro processes, they aim to generate customer demand and also to facilitate the placement and tracking of orders. It also includes processes such as marketing, pricing, sales, order management, and a call center management. So here we can see the 3 types of macro processes put all together in sort of you could call it as a flow or more of a graph showing how the progression might be. So you have in the one end, you have the SRM processes, which are the supplier relationship management. That's on one side of the spectrum. So on that side of the spectrum, we have everything that deals with the company and the supplier. That's regarding sourcing, procurement, negotiating contracts and deals, buying, actually putting in the orders with the suppliers to buy the materials and products we need. We can do design collaborations, meaning we could work together with the suppliers to create or design a particular item that we might need. And we collaborate to make sure that our supplies are flowing through our supply chain. That's on the one end, the supplier company side of things. Then we move towards sort of the middle of the spectrum here. And we have the internal supply chain management. Those are all the processes that are internal to the firm. It's in the name, internal supply chain management. Now, these are all the things that we do within a company that are strategic planning, demand planning, supply planning, fulfillment, and any kind of assistance in the field or field service. Now, here in the firm, this is everything that goes on internally, and it's outside of what happens with the supplier and later on with the customer. Next, on the other side of the spectrum, you can see the customer end, and that is the CRM. And these are all the processes that focus on the interface between the company and its customers. This could be things such as doing market research, placing a particular marketing or promotion or advertising activities, setting prices depending on the market, selling and placing and fulfilling orders, as well as managing our orders and our call centers. So everything customer related, right? So this is sort of the spectrum of looking at the macro processes from a perspective of breaking them down into 3 types. So we're going to take a look at an example of a company and how the different macro processes are reflected in that particular company and their supply chain. So here we're going to take a look at W.W. Grainger. And if you don't know them, they're an industrial supply company. Now, the way that Grainger breaks down their processes is as follows. We have the first one, which is a supplier relationship management, or SRM, which we just learned about. And W.W. Grainger, the SRM processes include the selection of various suppliers for various products, the negotiation of pricing and delivery terms with those suppliers, sharing of demand and supply plans with the suppliers, and the placement of replenishment orders. So within this company, this is what they structure as far as what processes fall under the supplier relationship management process or macro process. Up next, we take a look at their internal supply chain management or ISCM. Now, the internal supply chain management processes include the planning for the location and sizes of warehouses, deciding which products to carry at each warehouse, preparing inventory management policies, and finally picking, packing, and actually shipping the orders out. All right. And finally, we look at their customer relationship management or CRM. Now, the customer relationship management for Grainger include the preparation of catalogs and other marketing materials, management of their website, management of the call centers that take orders, and also provide service. So one key concept that we have to focus in when we talk about macro processes or any kind of process in general within supply chain is the integration of these processes. And that's what we're going to talk about next. We can see from the previous example, the Grainger, that all 3 macro processes are aimed at serving the same customer. And ultimately, this is the objective of macro processes. I mentioned this very early on, but I need to emphasize it here again. Now, ultimately, the objective of macro processes is to successfully serve the customer and create an integrated supply chain. That's the objective here. And I'm going to get to talk about the importance of this integration and integration in supply chain in general in future lessons, because it is a very important concept and something that has to be implemented in the real world in our supply chains as we function day to day. So that is why we introduce it here. So just keep in mind the objective of macro processes is to really serve the customer. And that's the objective of all of our supply chains. So in general, it makes sense that they will also be the objective of macro processes. Now, we also want to, at the same time, create a supply chain structure that's integrated. What does that mean? That it comes together and it makes sense in the way that it comes together. One of the biggest reasons for this, I mean, like I said, we're going to get to talk about it later, but one of the biggest reasons for this is because we want to avoid one duplication of processes, meaning that we're not doing the same thing over and over in one area that we're repeating in another area and using up double the resources, double the time, double the efforts, and twice the cost. That is one of the biggest reasons for integration, meaning we bring in all of these processes in a way that it's smooth and it flows, but that it also doesn't create duplication of these processes. Now, this is all great to know in concept and in theory, but in the real world, there are many instances where integration is not always at play, or things don't always follow the same structure that we just discussed as far as what macro processes are and how they're broken down into 3 different types. That doesn't mean that every single company out there in the real world is going to implement the processes in this particular format. That is just a concept. That is just a theory. In practice, it might be structured differently depending on how the company functions. For example, in some firms, marketing might be in charge of the customer relationship management macro processes. In others, manufacturing handles the internal supply chain management macro process, while others, purchasing, oversees the supplier relationship management macro processes. The problem is when there will be little to no communication among these different elements. It is not unusual for marketing and manufacturing departments to have different forecasts or making them plans. And this is what I mean by duplication. The marketing department and manufacturing might have different people or different departments working on one forecast when demand is all going to be the same. Demand will be the same regardless of what department is going to be doing this particular forecast. So why not work together and integrate these efforts in a way that makes sense for the company and for the customer that the company is looking to fulfill their need or their demand, right? This is all to just make point of why integration is important, and a lack of integration really hurts the supply chain's ability to match supply and demand effectively. This leads to customers who are dissatisfied and also to higher costs. That's why more companies should really structure a supply chain and their organizations within the supply chain in a way that it mirrors the macro processes that we just learned and that ensures that they have good communication and coordination among all the different owners of these processes or the parties responsible for these processes so that they can interact with one another in a way that gives everybody a better chance to succeed. And that is the end of today's lesson regarding what are supply chain macro processes. In our next lesson in the Learning Logistics series, we're going to discuss what are supply chain strategies. I introduced this topic earlier in the lessons, but here in the next one, lesson number 6 already, we're going to talk about supply chain strategies in a lot more detail. So stay tuned. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'm Professor Rodriguez. Stay tuned for lesson number 6 and leave me a comment below on what topics you want me to discuss next. Don't forget to give us a like, subscribe to our channel, and follow us in social media if that's your thing. If not, you can always catch us up on YouTube and see what we have coming up next. Thank you and see you soon.